It begins at the edge of death. A young man stands in the freezing December air of 1849, his hands tied, his eyes fixed on the barrels of rifles aimed at his chest. He has only minutes left to live. The sound of boots crunching on snow, the murmurs of soldiers, the thundering silence of a crowd, these are supposed to be his last sensations. But then, at the very last moment, a messenger arrives. A pardon. The execution was a cruel performance, a staged mockery designed to terrify. One moment he was dead, the next he was alive again. And in that violent transition between annihilation and rebirth, something irreversible happened inside him. That man was Fyodor Dostoevsky, and everything he would write after that day carried the mark of someone who had looked straight into the abyss and returned. From that moment on, his voice as a writer was no longer just that of a novelist, it was the voice of a man who had seen the fragility of existence, who had tasted despair, and who had decided to wrestle with the deepest contradictions of the human soul. Dostoevsky's works are not light, nor comforting. They don't give us easy answers or smooth illusions. Instead, they ask us to step into the underground of our own minds, to confront our irrationality, our contradictions, our desperate longing for meaning in a world that often feels indifferent. And that is why, more than a century later, we still return to him. Because his stories, though born in 19th century Russia, echo with uncanny familiarity today. He forces us to ask questions we'd rather avoid. Do we really want happiness, or do we secretly sabotage it? Is rational progress enough, or does our irrational soul always rebel? Why do we suffer, and could suffering be the very thing that redeems us? This is the world of Dostoevsky. A world where pain and beauty are inseparable, where madness is always close to reason, and where the human being, in all its contradictions, becomes the central mystery to solve. And in this journey, we will uncover why Dostoevsky believed that to truly live is to suffer, and to suffer is the only path to awakening. To understand Dostoevsky's vision of humanity, we must go back before the rifles, before Siberia, before the fame. We must look at the child who grew up among corridors of sickness and whispers of death. Born in 1821, in Moscow, Dostoevsky spent his early years inside the grounds of a hospital where his father worked as a doctor. Every day he was exposed to scenes of suffering, poverty, and despair. Human pain was not an abstraction but a daily presence. His mother, deeply religious but frail, would die of tuberculosis when he was still a teenager. Not long after, his father would also die, under mysterious and violent circumstances, possibly murdered by his own serfs. Loss, illness, poverty, mystery. These weren't just passing events in Dostoevsky's life, they were the soil in which his imagination was planted. Unlike other writers who might idealize the world or seek to escape it, Dostoevsky was drawn deeper into its darkness. He was fascinated, even haunted, by the paradox of human nature, our capacity for tenderness and cruelty, for faith and despair, for self-destruction and redemption. Though he trained as an engineer, literature pulled him in with irresistible force. His first novel, Poor Folk, was celebrated as the birth of the Russian social novel. But almost immediately, failure followed success. His later works received little attention, his finances collapsed, and he became entangled with radical circles of intellectuals dreaming of utopian socialism. And it was precisely this entanglement that would lead him to the execution ground, to the rifles that never fired. Instead of death, he was sent to Siberia. Imagine it, for years in a labor camp, chains on his feet, surrounded by murderers, thieves, men broken by violence and deprivation. There, Dostoevsky came face to face with the raw extremes of human existence, not in theory, but in flesh and blood. He saw that even in the most wretched conditions, men still prayed, still cursed, still hoped, still loved. Humanity could not be reduced to pure rationality, nor to perfect evil. It was always both. When he finally returned, he was no longer the young dreamer chasing utopias. He was a man who had lived death twice, once in front of the rifles, once in Siberia. And from then on, his novels would become laboratories of the soul, where characters wrestled with questions too heavy for philosophy alone and too raw for science to answer. It is in this crucible of suffering that Dostoevsky's greatest insight begins to take shape. Suffering is not an obstacle to life, it is life itself. And no novel reveals this better than the one that would redefine the modern psyche, Notes from Underground. In 1864, Dostoevsky published Notes from Underground, a strange, unsettling little book that would go on to shape the entire future of modern literature and psychology. In its pages, we meet the so-called underground man, a retired civil servant who spends his days brooding in a dark apartment, pouring venom onto paper. He hates society. He hates himself. He despises the false ideals people cling to: progress, reason, utopia, happiness. And through his bitterness, Dostoevsky reveals one of the most radical critiques of modernity ever written. The underground man insists on a disturbing truth: people don't actually want perfect happiness. They don't want a life free of pain. Even if you gave them paradise, he says, they would smash it to pieces just to prove they were free. Because deep inside us burns a stubborn need for agency, for the power to choose, even if it means choosing self-destruction. Think about it: if happiness were guaranteed, if every desire could be satisfied by pressing a button, would we really be content? Or would we grow restless, resentful, desperate to break the system simply to prove that we are not machines? Dostoevsky believed the latter. He saw that the human soul, irrational and chaotic, would rather suffer freely than be programmed into bliss. Man only likes to count his troubles, he wrote. He doesn't calculate his happiness. And here lies Dostoevsky's warning: the rational dream of a perfect society, free from suffering, is not just impossible, it's dangerous. Because in trying to eliminate pain, we also eliminate freedom. We reduce human beings to piano keys, playing only the melodies dictated by reason and progress. But man is not a piano. Man is a storm. In Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky shows us that suffering is not a glitch in the system, it is the system. It is through struggle, through contradiction, through the clash between what we want and what we fear, that we discover who we are. To remove suffering would be to remove humanity itself. This insight was not just a rejection of utopian ideals of his time, it was a prophecy. Today, we live surrounded by promises of comfort, efficiency, and happiness, and yet anxiety and depression are higher than ever. We have nearly endless entertainment, medicine, and technology, and still, many of us feel empty. Dostoevsky would say, of course you do. Because you cannot program the soul. But what happens when we push this philosophy to its extreme, not in theory, but in life? Dostoevsky would answer with one of his most famous creations, the tormented law student Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment. 2 years after Notes from Underground, Dostoevsky published the novel that would cement his place as one of the greatest psychological writers in history, Crime and Punishment. At its core lies a terrifying question: what happens when reason, untethered from morality, justifies the most unforgivable act? The novel follows Rodion Raskolnikov, a brilliant but impoverished law student wandering the streets of St. Petersburg. Crushed by poverty, humiliated by his inability to support his family, and fueled by intellectual arrogance, Raskolnikov convinces himself of a radical idea: some people, extraordinary people, are above morality. They have the right, even the duty, to commit crimes if those crimes serve a higher purpose. And so he tells himself a story: killing a cruel pawnbroker woman, who exploits the poor, would not be murder, it would be justice. Her death would free her victims, provide money for his mother and sister, and allow him to pursue a career that could bring greater good to society. Reason seems to support the plan. Logic makes it sound noble. But beneath all the reasoning, Dostoevsky places a seed of poison. The human heart does not obey reason. Raskolnikov kills the woman. And then, by cruel accident, he kills her innocent sister too. At first, he believes he has succeeded. But almost immediately, he is consumed by dread. He sweats. He hallucinates. He collapses into delirium. The brilliance of Dostoevsky lies here. The true punishment does not come from the law, it comes from within. Raskolnikov discovers that he cannot escape his conscience. No philosophy, no rational justification, no intellectual arrogance can silence the primal truth written in his soul. He has taken life, and life demands reckoning. He thought himself extraordinary, but he finds himself trembling, broken, unable to bear the weight of his own freedom. Through Raskolnikov's torment, Dostoevsky dismantles the illusion that morality can be reduced to rational calculation. He shows us that the human being is not a machine of logic but a mystery of contradictions. We long for greatness but collapse under guilt. We dream of freedom but chain ourselves with fear. And yet, Dostoevsky does not leave the story in despair. At the end of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov confesses. He accepts prison. And in the darkness of punishment, a faint light begins to emerge: redemption. Through suffering, through humility, through the rediscovery of faith and compassion, even the most fallen soul can rise again. This is the paradox at the heart of Dostoevsky's vision. Suffering is not only inevitable, it is transformative. To run from it is to run from life. To accept it is to begin to heal. But Dostoevsky's exploration of the soul did not stop there. In his later works, he would go even deeper, into madness, into faith, into the eternal tension between freedom and salvation. If Notes from Underground was Dostoevsky's rebellion against utopia, and Crime and Punishment his dissection of guilt, then The Idiot was his attempt to imagine innocence, what it might look like if pure goodness walked among us. The central character, Prince Mishkin, is often described as Christ-like, gentle, compassionate, and capable of cruelty. But Dostoevsky, who knew human nature all too well, does not place Mishkin in a safe world. Instead, he drops him into a society brimming with ambition, envy, and deceit. And what happens? The world does not embrace him. It destroys him. Through Mishkin, Dostoevsky makes a painful point: in a broken world, pure goodness is not merely rare, it is unbearable. Human beings, tangled in pride and desire, cannot tolerate innocence. We either exploit it, mock it, or crush it. And yet, Dostoevsky shows us this character not as a failure, but as a reminder, a vision of what could exist, however fleeting, when compassion resists corruption. But perhaps the most haunting passage in The Idiot is when a character recounts standing before a firing squad, awaiting death, only to be pardoned at the last second. The description is nearly identical to Dostoevsky's own experience years earlier. He remembers how, in those final minutes, time stretched into infinity. He divided his last moments into segments: 2 minutes to say goodbye, 2 minutes to think about himself, 1 final minute to gaze at the sky. And in that terrible clarity, he realized how every moment of life, every breath, every sunbeam, every glance, was an immeasurable treasure. This revelation burned into his imagination. To Dostoevsky, life itself was sacred not because it was painless, but because it was fleeting. The awareness of death sharpened the beauty of existence. The possibility of losing everything made every second infinite. And this is where Dostoevsky diverges from pure despair. Yes, life is filled with suffering. Yes, utopias are illusions. Yes, human beings are irrational and self-destructive. But to be alive, to simply exist, is still a miracle. A miracle so overwhelming that even the thought of losing it is unbearable. Through this paradox, Dostoevsky delivers a message more urgent than ever: we are not here to eliminate suffering, but to live deeply within it, to transform it into meaning, compassion, and redemption. This theme would reach its fullest form in his final masterpiece, The Brothers Karamazov, where he confronts the ultimate questions of faith, morality, and the possibility of transcendent love. In his final novel, The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky brought together the threads of his entire life, his doubts, his faith, his despair, and his hope. It is more than a story of a dysfunctional family. It is a stage where the deepest questions of existence are argued, sometimes with such intensity that they feel timeless. The Karamazov brothers each embody a different facet of the human soul. Dmitri, the passionate sensualist, consumed by desire and impulsiveness. Ivan, the intellectual, cold and rational, who wages war against God with piercing arguments. And Alyosha, the gentle believer, guided by faith, humility, and love. Through them, Dostoevsky dramatizes the inner battlefield of every human being, the clash between flesh, reason, and spirit. Perhaps the most famous chapter of the novel, The Grand Inquisitor, places Ivan at the center of one of the most devastating critiques of Christianity ever written. In it, he imagines Christ returning to earth during the Spanish Inquisition, only to be arrested by the Church. The Grand Inquisitor tells Christ that humanity does not want freedom, only bread and security. That Christ asked too much of mankind by granting them choice, when what they truly crave is to be ruled. Here, Dostoevsky lays bare a terrifying paradox: freedom, which we praise as the highest good, is also what terrifies us the most. To be free means to bear the weight of responsibility, to live without guarantees. And for many, that burden is unbearable. Better to submit to authority, ideology, or dogma than to confront the abyss of freedom. This is Dostoevsky at his sharpest, reminding us that human beings are not simply rational seekers of truth, but fragile creatures who often prefer lies, illusions, and chains, if those chains promise comfort. And yet, alongside Ivan's despair, there is Alyosha's faith. Alyosha does not win his battles through argument, but through presence, through kindness, forgiveness, and love. Dostoevsky is not naive. He knows how dark the world is, how brutal human nature can be. But in Alyosha, he gives us a glimpse of the possibility that even within the chaos, there can be redemption, not through reason alone, but through compassion. At the heart of The Brothers Karamazov is this question: can humanity live without God? Ivan says no, without God, all is permitted, and morality collapses. Alyosha says yes, but only if we live as though love itself were sacred. And Dostoevsky, perhaps more than answering, leaves us suspended in the tension between the two, forcing us to wrestle with it ourselves. This was Dostoevsky's gift. He did not offer easy solutions. He gave us mirrors, sometimes cruel, sometimes luminous, so that in seeing them, we might see ourselves more clearly. Dostoevsky died in 1881, his lungs ravaged by illness, but his voice never left us. More than a century later, his words still cut through the noise of our modern lives with almost prophetic precision. He spoke of nihilism before the term was fashionable, of existential despair before it had a name, of the dangers of utopian dreams long before the 20th century proved him right with blood and ruins. Look at the world today, a society obsessed with technology, comfort, and progress, yet plagued with depression, loneliness, and meaninglessness. Dostoevsky warned us of this paradox. He knew that no amount of wealth, no scientific discovery, no political system could erase the fact that suffering is woven into human life. He knew that when we try to build paradise on earth without acknowledging our own brokenness, we create hell instead. But he also left us with hope, not the cheap optimism of ignoring pain, but the hope that comes through facing it. He taught that redemption is possible, but only when we confront our shadows, confess our illusions, and endure the fire of suffering without running from it. In his own life, he had every reason to give up poverty, illness, imprisonment, the mock execution, but instead, he transformed his torment into art that still awakens us today. This is why Dostoevsky matters now more than ever. In a culture drowning in distraction, he calls us back to honesty. In a world that avoids pain at all costs, he reminds us that pain can save us. In a time when we mistake progress for meaning, he whispers that meaning is not given, it is wrestled from the depths of our own souls. As he wrote, man is a mystery. It needs to be unraveled, and if you spend your whole life unraveling it, don't say you've wasted time. I am studying this mystery because I want to be a human being. Dostoevsky's legacy is not just his novels, but the mirror he holds before us. A mirror that forces us to ask, who am I, really? What do I believe? What am I willing to suffer for? And in those questions, uncomfortable as they are, lies the possibility of freedom. Because in the end, Dostoevsky's message is not that we are doomed. It is that we are human, and being human means being fragile, irrational, and broken, but also capable of love, redemption, and grace. Dostoevsky showed us that the deepest truths are not found in comfort but in confrontation, with ourselves, with our illusions, with our suffering. His characters bleed because he bled. They fall because he fell. And they rise, however fragilely, because he too found a way to rise. You and I are not so different from the underground man, from Raskolnikov, from Ivan or Alyosha. We wrestle with the same contradictions, the longing for freedom and the fear of it, the hunger for happiness and the instinct to sabotage it, the desire to love and the terror of being known. And like Dostoevsky's characters, we too stand at the edge of despair and redemption every single day. The question is not whether suffering will come, it will. The question is what we will do with it. Will we numb it, deny it, and let it poison us from within? Or will we face it, name it, and allow it to burn away the illusions we've clung to? Dostoevsky's answer was simple, though never easy: walk into the fire. Embrace the mystery. Do not run from the darkness inside you, because in that darkness lies the possibility of light. If you have stayed with me through this journey, perhaps something within you has stirred, an unease, a recognition, maybe even a strange relief. That is not by accident. That is the voice Dostoevsky wanted us to hear, not his, but our own, echoing back from the depths. So let me ask you, what illusions are you ready to let go of? What suffering will you stop running from? And what truth, however uncomfortable, are you finally ready to face? If this message spoke to you, don't let it fade. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your reflection in the comments below. And subscribe, so we can keep walking together through these questions that matter, even when they hurt. Because Dostoevsky reminds us, it is precisely in the struggle, in the contradiction, in the suffering, that we become most human. And maybe, just maybe, that is where we also become most free.